No, no, no. I don't need those. I have my own card.
Oh.
Thanks. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janaballabha Giri Bharadari Gopi Janaballabha Giri Bharadari Yasodhana Braja Janaranjana Yasodhanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Banachari Jaira Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hey. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Ramo, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahamsa Parvadikacharya, To Tarasata Shri Srimad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki, ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki, Premsika Host Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki, Shri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shama Kundradakun, Giri Govardhanaki. All glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to Shri. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Agyanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Anmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijam Tam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Avaneshvari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we are on Canto 3, Chapter 24, Text 18, right? And TV is permanently out, or how's that going to work? Oh, okay. Okay. Eshamanavite garbham. Eshamanavite garbham. Pravishta kaita bhardana. Pravishta kaita bhardhana. Avidya samshaya granthim. Avidya samshaya granthim. Chitvagam vicharishyati. Chitvagam vicharishyati. Eshamanavite garbham. Pravishta kaita bhardhana. Avidya samshaya granthim. Chitvagam vicharishyati. Eshamanavite garbham. Pravishta kaita bhardhana. Avidya samshaya granthim. Chitvagam vicharishyati. Eshamanavite garbham. Pravishta kaita bhardhana. Avidya samshaya granthim. Chitvagam vicharishyati. Vaishnavis. Eshamanavite garbham pravrshta kairtabardhanaha avidya samshaya grantin chitvagam vacharishyati. Esha, the same Supreme Personality of Godhead. Manavi, O daughter of Manu. Te, your. Garbham, womb. Pravishta, has entered. Kaitaba Ardana, the killer of the demon Kaitaba. Avidya, of ignorance. Samshaya, and of doubt. Grantim, the knot. Chitva, cutting off. Gam, the world. Vicharishyati, he will travel over. So the translation reads, Lord Brahma then told Devahuti, my dear daughter of Manu, the same Supreme Personality of Godhead who killed the demon Kaitaba is now within your womb. He will cut off all the knots of your ignorance and doubt. Then he will travel all over the world. So if we can chant responsively. Lord Brahma then told Devahuti, my dear daughter of Manu, the same Supreme Personality of Godhead who killed the demon Kaitaba is now within your womb. He will cut off all the knots and doubt. Then he will travel all over the world. So here is the purport by Srila Prabhupada. Here the word avidya is very significant. Avidya means forgetfulness of one's identity. Every one of us is a spirit soul. But we have forgotten. We think, I am this body. This is avidya. Samshaya granti means doubtfulness. The knot of doubtfulness is tied when the soul identifies with the material world. That knot is called ahankara, the junction of matter and spirit. By proper knowledge received from the scriptures in disciplic succession, and by proper application of that knowledge, one can free himself from this binding combination of matter and spirit. Brahma assures Devahuti that her son will enlighten her, and after enlightening her, he will travel all over the world distributing the system of Sankhya philosophy. The word samshaya means doubtful knowledge. Speculative and pseudo-yogic knowledge is all doubtful. At the present moment, the so-called yoga system is prosecuted on the understanding that by the agitation of different stations of the bodily construction, one can find that he is God. The mental speculators think similarly, but they are all doubtful. Real knowledge is expounded in Bhagavad Gita. Become Krishna conscious, just worship Krishna, and become a devotee of Krishna. That is real knowledge. And anyone who follows that system becomes perfect without a doubt. Eshamanavite garbham pravishta kaita bhardanaha avidya samshaya grantin chetvagam vicharishyati. Lord Brahma then told Devahuti, my dear daughter of Manu, Personality of Godhead, who killed the demon Kaitaba, is now within your womb. He will cut off all the knots of your ignorance and doubt. Then he will travel all over the world. We've been reading from this section in Srimad Bhāgavatam. And what started off basically with Kardama pacifying Devahuti. So Devahuti was somewhat disturbed in mind because she felt that she had not really gotten the best of what she could have out of her relationship with Kardama, and he was now leaving. But here, then Kardama assuages her thinking and explains that no, soon the Supreme Lord will take birth in your womb. And here Brahma is echoing that same sentiment, that soon the Lord Kapilade, who has lotus eyes and has blonde hair. It's interesting detail, huh? Will appear as Devahuti's son. And then he will explain the process of Sankhya to Devahuti, and after that, then he will travel all over the world, describing the process of Sankhya. And I couldn't help but sort of pick up about this particular verse, that the word samshaya was there. You know, we have Sri Bhagavana Vacha, Maya Shakta Manoparta, Yoga Nyunjan Madashraya, Samshaya Samagram Mam Yata Gyashasi Trinu. So that's Bhagavad Gita, the first verse of the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And so Krishna is telling Arjuna that I will now explain to you this process of yoga, which will remove all doubt. So we have Shamshaya, will remove all doubt. And it's interesting, I think this must be the most used verse that Prabhupada ever gave class on, because I looked at it in the Veda base, and this is 7.1. This verse, Prabhupada used it as a jumping board, or a diving board for diving into Krishna consciousness in general. Because essentially, what Krishna is doing at the beginning of chapter 7 is he's getting ready to explain Krishna consciousness, you know. So up until that point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, he was talking with Arjuna about various yoga systems and various kinds of processes of the Vedas and various important things and not so important things. But at the end of 6th chapter, Krishna winds it all back around to the idea that, you know, become a yogi, O Arjuna. And then he explains what kind of yogi he wants Arjuna to be. So now that he's done that, now he's explaining the process to become that kind of yogi. So, Maya Sakta Mano Parta Yogan Yunjan Madashraya Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yata Gyasyasi Touch Trinu. Just here. And this will destroy all doubt. So Kaitaba is a demon. So sometimes Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada uses the idea that doubts are like demons, and Krishna is ready and able to kill those demons by his words. But I would like to focus in on two things here. In his explanation of this chapter, this part of this chapter, because we're in the second section, from 1 to 6, we hear Kardama pacifying Devahuti, and then from 7 all the way up to, I think it's 25, we hear about this idea of Kapila beginning, or we're hearing the lead up to Kapila appearing. That's what we're hearing. So later on we'll get into the next section, which talks about Kardama's prayers to Kapila. So generally speaking, the father doesn't offer prayers to the son, but in this case, because Kapila is actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kardama will offer all kinds of prayers to his son, but that's later. So Devahuti is going to hear a systematic presentation of Sankhya. Sankhya is, by its very nature, Sankhya means to understand something in great detail, in a systematic way. It's kind of very similar to the way we think of the modern word science. You know, the modern word science means to try to understand something in detail in a systematic way. And in general, the process of hearing from either the representative of the Lord or the Lord himself, it will slash, what are the words here that he uses? Oh, fear, lamentation, ignorance, and doubt. Those four things. Those are kind of words that are peppered throughout this part of the Srimad Bhāgavatam. Fear, lamentation, doubt, and ignorance. Those four things. So this is how we know that the process of Krishna consciousness is working. But of course, sometimes we will also experience doubts. We will not actually understand how a thing is. But if we're sincere and we base our understanding on Guru Shastra, then those doubts will eventually be slashed. No one, especially no one of us, will ever understand everything in absolute detail, because the universe is too intricate. Krishna doesn't reveal everything. It's not necessary to know everything, but we can know what we need to know. And that's what we should betake ourselves to the process of doing, knowing what we need to know. So what is doubt exactly? I was just thinking about this. Doubt is something like asking the question, is it like this, or is it not like this? So we hear something and we say, is that the way it is, or is that not the way it is? So that's one of the first kinds of way of thinking about doubt, is whether something exists or it doesn't exist, and also whether this is the right explanation for it or that is the right explanation for it. And doubt and ignorance go together. They're essentially interrelated very intimately, because we can also just not know what something is. We can see something and not understand it. So that's kind of a doubt. And so doubt is something that plagues the human mind. And those who have not engaged in devotional service or become involved in researching the scriptures, they will have doubts about many things. And sometimes those doubts can leave us very confused and dissipated. And so that's why it's important to actually clear those doubts, clear them by making a systematic attempt to understand our philosophy. Now, I remember, when I first came to Krishna consciousness, I was a bhakta. I was in a group of devotees. We went out on Sankirtan all day long, basically. We got in a van and we went to Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. We got there at about I think, 8 or 9 o'clock, and then we came back, something like 7 or 8 in the evening. So we were all day out there on Fisherman's Wharf, and it was grueling. And we had one day back, that's how they called it, and that was the day that you tried to catch up on things and, deal with medical issues and those kind of things, and also try to get something out of reading. So here was your one day, your day back, and then you would read. And then Krishna smiled, and his mother said to him as he... And I quickly came to realize that reading is not easy. And even classes are not easy. And you may think that it's just you. Or you may think it's those pakoras that you ate last night. You may think it was the extra halava you had last Sunday. You may think, but actually that's not what's happening. In the Harinam Chintamani, it mentions that, generally speaking, we find nobody falls asleep eating prasadam. That just somehow doesn't happen. I've done it a couple of times, but mostly it doesn't happen to people, You seem to be wide awake when you're eating. However, in a roaring kirtan, usually people don't fall asleep either, generally speaking. It's not so difficult. Japa, now that's different. When you're doing japa, staying awake is not at all easy. And why is that? Because we are doing something very subtle, and we're trying to focus the mind, and the body just wants to shut down. We maybe have a little bit of a difficulty in getting off the ground and really hearing the japa, and so we mumble a few rounds, and the next thing we know, we can just barely keep our eyes open, so we decide to take rest. Now, you might not know it, but actually reading or hearing the philosophy is even harder than japa, even harder. That the tendency for the modes of ignorance or passion to take over are even more difficult in the process of assimilating the philosophy. Because if we are overtaken by the mode of ignorance, as we're listening, we're nodding out. And it happens to me too. I'm not pointing the fingers at people. That's a lot of times why I walk, because I know that if I just sit down, the body will go, oh, I didn't get much rest last. Oh, I didn't get much rest last night, so I should actually, conk out or something like that. So sometimes that's there. Oh, thank you very much. So this is not just you, and it's not just those pakoras. This is the material energy, the way it works on everybody. So you have to make some kind of strategy to overcome that. And of course, when I was first trying to learn the philosophy, another thing that was interesting was the fact that back then, there were no seminars. You just read the books. That was the only avenue of understanding philosophy. Nobody, did things. You would, like we do today, you would listen to someone give class, and then the next day it'd be a different person, the next day it'd be a different person, each person with their different take on what's going on. And I remember the very first time, my very first class, I was sitting there in Berkeley, at the Berkeley Temple. And they put the sound on, and it was a Prabhupada class. And Prabhupada was saying, And this way, one will know what the spiritual world has. I was thinking, God, I can't believe it. These people are listening. They actually understand what he's saying. I guess I have to learn some foreign language or something like that. You know, partly, which I think is the same issue we've got here, is they had the bass turned up on the PA system. So when you turn up the bass, all you hear are the lower frequencies, and you can't understand what's actually being said, you know. So it was really hard to penetrate. It was really hard to penetrate. So, you know, after a while, I could understand Sarva, Dharma, Paritya, Jamame, Kam Sharanam. You know, you could recognize verses after a while. But in the very beginning, the whole thing is Prabhupada's phasing in between saying Sanskrit and saying English, and his accent is very unusual unless you've grown up in India where it's not so unusual. And you're trying to make sense of it all. And on top of it, the good old mode of Iggy is trying to put you to sleep, you know, while you're doing it. So education is really an important thing. This is partly a soapbox moment here because I was talking with Matuna yesterday. And the future of our whole movement is based on education. Prabhupada intended Krishna consciousness to be an educational movement. And that means education, you know. You can attend classes, you can listen to tapes, et cetera, but at some point you have to do Sankhya, you have to do some systematic endeavor to go through the philosophy and understand how it relates. I mean, yes, some people get there without that. That's there, you know. Krishna says, Tesha mibanu kamparta mahama jnanajam tamaha nasayatmi atma mahavasto jnanadipenya bhasvata. That for those I give with the shining lamp of knowledge that I destroy the darkness due to ignorance, which is similar to what's being said here. And Prabhupada talks about even if one is not intelligent enough to understand or relate to the scriptures. But most of us were brought up in a Western society where it's common to understand mathematics, it's common to understand how to read, it's common to understand how to write in a way that's understandable by many people. It's common to understand these things. And so our intellectual capacities have been, you know, ramped up. But somehow I find that when devotees are back in kind of an academic environment, in the relationship to learning Krishna consciousness in a systematic way, I think, you know, the memories, those painful memories of high school and grade school come back, and we kind of can hardly manage it, you know, that it seems too much to bear, you know, to try to systematically understand, you know, coming to a class over and over again, the same teacher, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But in the long run, there's a quote, the devotional life you save may be your own. You know, that was a line from Broderick Crawford on Highway Patrol on television, but I kind of changed it a little bit to be appropriate for the situation. The devotional life you may save, the life you save may be your own devotional life. So at some point, you have to bite the bullet and engage in the process. What will happen in the future of ISKCON if we have an uneducated congregation, uneducated temple staff, if we have an uneducated movement in general, is we will turn into churchianity, which is what all religions do. You know, people come, people put some bag of rice on the altar, right? And some incense, some grapes possibly, maybe a pineapple or two. And that's Sunday program. Then we go home. And that's religion. So to actually push on through the years of Krishna consciousness, most of us have been ramped in to an intellectual understanding of the world around us. And so if we don't understand it through the lens of the Vedic literatures, we are definitely going to understand it through the lens of our social conditioning. So it's one of those two. So either we'll understand Krishna consciousness through the lens of our social conditioning, or we will have made that effort to recognize what the underpinnings are of Krishna consciousness, what we mean by devotional service. And in this way, we will make some progress. Now, I'm also feel like the 80-20 principle is definitely there. That probably in any congregation, whether you're talking about Christianity, Krishna consciousness, Buddhism, or whatever it is, you've got maybe 20% of the people who really know what they're doing. And the other 80% are along for the ride. And they're making progress. But someone has to be in that core of people who know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Otherwise, you're along for the ride. And if the people at the core start to lose it, then essentially all those people in the periphery just drift off in every possible direction. And that may be the future. I certainly hope not. But that may be the future. Now, you know, who knows how many years I have left, you know, not that many. Most of us that are, you know, Prabhupada disciples have, you know, a couple of dozen years left at the best probably, you know, and the rest of the younger people will either make the effort to see value. That was one of the things that Matuna said yesterday that really stuck in my mind. That you have to see value in education. If you don't see any value in it, it's just another thing that you're supposed to do, like cut potatoes, you know. So you mop a floor, cut potatoes, you put your dhoti or sari on, and then you maybe read or maybe don't, you know. There has to be a value in it, because what's the use of a huge congregation? What if we become, you know, an ISKCON version of a mega church like Joel Osteen or something like that? Lots of people coming, you know, big, you know, pictures, you know, on giant full screens, you know, big, you know, displays and lots of celebration and this and that and the other. But nobody has any real idea of what we're doing. What is the idea of renunciation? What do we really mean by upadhis or designations? How do we rise above material nature? So there are some of us who are really concerned about education. And there are devotees who are actually making a sincere endeavor. You know, we've had these you know, Bhakti Shastri courses. I think this is a good step. It is a systematic way of approaching our philosophy. But I think it needs to go farther. And it undoubtedly takes time. It undoubtedly will be something that you will do in place of something else that you might have done, you know. So at some point, you have to see some value in it. And if you do, then you will make the effort, you know. Probably, I mean, maybe you'll be fortunate somewhere where there'll be an administration that forces you to study on a regulated basis. But it ain't happened here, and it ain't happened yet, you know. So, you know, Bhāgavatam class, you know, once or twice a week or even 7 days a week, is great, but it's a different speaker every day, a different subject, a different way of presentation. And will we get a systematic understanding. This philosophy is systematic, and if you work your way through it, you'll realize that what it says in Bhagavad Gita is the same thing as what it says in Chaitanya Charitamrita, or the same thing as what it says in a slightly different way in Srimad Bhāgavatam. And eventually you tie all these things together to see that this is one wonderful thing. And we begin to see what's really important and what isn't so important. So that's where ISKCON may seriously run into trouble. In the future, if we have an uneducated congregation, things that are minor will become great controversies that drive devotees into separate camps and maybe even split from ISKCON. And really important things don't even get talked about, and gradually ISKCON just rolls off the rails into the berm or even into the ditch on one side or another. So we have to know what are those important things and what are not so important things. And this is all according to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So you might be surprised to know the Srimad Bhāgavatam has some 18,000 verses. But what is the crux of our philosophy? We're going to put it into a nutshell. Of course, we have the nutshell verses, Aham Sarvasya Prabhavo, starting, that's the nutshell verses in the Bhagavad Gita. And then we have the nutshell verses in Srimad Bhāgavatam, Aham Eva Gre, So we have those 4 verses, which are pretty hard to really get a sense of the core or the crux of Krishna consciousness. But there have been devotees in our line who have given us various, usually it runs into 10 major principles that are the core of Krishna consciousness. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur put together something he called the Dasa Mula Tattva, or also Dasa Mula Shiksha. And we have from Madhvacharya, he had 10 points that are, these are the things that you can't bargain with. These are the things that are essentially Krishna consciousness. They never change, and if you decide you want to alter one, you've immediately lost the plot. So these are the things that never change. Everything else is an adaptation of those things in some way according to time, place, and circumstance. So we will need to have unity and diversity. And so that means that on some level, we will have the same idea. And with diversity on some level, we will be diverse. And we have to know where it's okay to be diverse and where it's not okay to be diverse, where we need to be unified and where we don't need to be unified. So this is the nature of understanding what is principle and what is detail, what is essential and what is time, place, and circumstance. So in ISKCON, we have a thing called the hermeneutics course, which begins to unfold that and explain that in a systematic way. But it won't mean anything to someone who hasn't really taken and understood Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhāgavatam, and Chaitanya Charitamrita in a very detailed way, because it'll be kind of over your head, So one has to be at least familiar with the literatures, fairly familiar with the literatures to get something out of it. But still, we can see that in the future, either this will become an important thing, and we will base our decisions, our policies, and the way we behave and the way we bring up new devotees, we will base them all on this kind of thing, hermeneutics, Dasamula Tattva. Right now, Bhaktivedanta Swami is in the process of codifying the Dasamula Tattva and doing a presentation of it that will be then later distributed. But this is why we need to understand what is more important and what is less important. And in this way, ISKCON can have unity and diversity. Otherwise, we'll have perversity in diversity, or we will have unity in, Stalag 14 of the, concentration camp, So one of those two things is the future if we don't work out unity and diversity. So, at any rate, that was my soapbox moment for asamshaya samagram mam, of doubt. We will have doubts. We need to have them cleared. If we make an effort to understand our philosophy, you will do yourself a huge favor. The devotional life you save may be your own. I'm here to say I went through so much junk in the earlier part of my devotional life, and if I'd been serious about reading the literatures of Prabhupada, I could have, missed a lot of that junk, I have no one to blame but myself, and maybe you're all doomed to make the same mistake. I don't know. I certainly hope not, that we can learn from hearing, maybe instead of having the good old school of hard knocks, But the devotional life you save may be your own. So if you make an effort to correlate Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, you'll never be the loser, and you will actually make progress. I'm hoping to leave a little bit of time here. So do we have our wireless mic somewhere? It's dead or non-existent, or it got taken to Columbus and never returned? Or? Oh, good.
Maharaj?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Maharaj, for the nice class. In regards to education, what I find such a crucial part of education is to educate our devotees how we are practically living our philosophy. Just to theoretically understand it, it's a good start.
Right.
But then the real challenge is, how do we live it? And I really feel we are not there yet at all.
Do you have any points that you can make as far as what would be key takeaways or major tips for how to put that into?
Well, I myself have made that humble attempt to establish an institute for spiritual culture. And I've
Institute for what culture?
Spiritual.
Spiritual culture, okay.
Yes, and I've put so many courses together, and I'm teaching them in Mayapur, and I'm putting them now in book form. So that's my humble contribution. But for example, Vanaprastha ashram, not established, even though the Bhāgavatam is full of statements where Prabhupada talks about it. But people have no idea, Yeah, because 269 in Bhagavad Gita, what is day to the common person is night to the introspective sage. So these two worldviews, material worldview, spiritual worldview, they're like day and night. And we are so conditioned by the day of the materialist. It's a very...
So conditioned by what?
The day of the materialist. Yes. So, but the day of the spiritualist is completely opposite. So what is success in material life may very well be the lowest in spiritual life. And we have to educate our devotees in this. Yes. So, yeah, I think this to be even more important than more deeply understanding the philosophy. You can engage in all kinds of philosophical gymnastics there, but what about living it? Or even Grihastha ashram. I've got a whole course on that, book on that. most devotees' family life is not an ashram. Let's be clear on this. We are far away. You know, yes. Already our high divorce rate shows that it's not an ashram, because in family life there is no divorce, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah, in so many aspects, you know. Yeah, so, you know, because you mentioned
How
that
far we are.
yeah, so but since you touched upon this topic of importance of education.
I think there's necessity for education on a lot of levels. The reason I really point out, you know, it may seem like it's just some kind of intellectual jugglery to understand the details of our philosophy, but what I find is that this is exactly where devotees start drawing up various battle lines, and big wars are fought over usually philosophical issues. And these issues should be clear, but oftentimes they're not. And people tend to make a whole, you know, hurricane out of them. In some cases, it's worth doing because an essential principles is at stake. And other times, it's not really a principle at stake, it's just a minor detail, and we can live and let live on that point. And then, of course, a place like here in New York, we live in a cosmopolitan situation where you can't help but run into disaffected members of ISKCON, run into independents, run into Ritviks, run into people from the Gaudiya Math, people who are following other acharyas, maybe even the, Radhakund Babajis or so. There are people like that. You may run into them, you probably do run into them on Sankirtan. So they have their story to tell. And unless we understand the philosophy, it's easy to get sold a facsimile of Krishna consciousness in some kind of way. And if we wind up associating with too many different kinds of devotees, we will assuredly, without a doubt, become eventually doubtful about everything. Because Prabhupada had a certain take on things. Gaudiya Math members have a certain take on things. The Ritviks have another take on things. We have disaffected members and independents who have their take on things. And so, if you listen to all these mouths, there will no doubt, especially if you haven't really made an effort to understand the philosophy, because then you're at the mercy of these things. Well, I didn't think about that. And then your brain starts moving in another way. And well, maybe they're just doing it wrong in the temple. That's what it is, wrong. And so that's a cautionary tale too. So I think both things are necessary. How to practically apply it. Because if we don't practically apply it, all we are is just some kind of, armchair philosophical thing, sitting back in the armchair with the pipe. Yes, I think that it must really be like that, But really, we need to apply. And it is true that it's not always straightforward to know how to take our philosophy and actually apply it to everyday things, to what we're doing, what we need to do, how we need to do it. Yes.
Thank you very much for the class, Maharaj. Such an important question. Education and all this. Kind of along the lines of, especially what Devaki Mataji was just saying, this is kind of a question that is arising in my mind, that there's two sort of ways to practice devotional service. It was interesting, we had darshan of Varshana Maharaj in New Vrindavan when all the brahmacharis went on retreat. And he said something interesting, that when Prabhupada gave Yukta Vairagya as a definition for ISKCON, like when he was preaching in the cities, he gave the definition that Yukta Vairagya means engaging everything in Krishna's service. And so we see like the trend of people who are like Prabhupada disciples who were in that situation, You know, they just gave everything to service. They just did like some very practical service, start temples, build something, whatever. And they just put their full energy into that, and that was their spiritual practice. And then it's interesting because Varshana Maharaj said that in New Vrindavan, Yukta Vairagya, he gave a different definition. He said it means simple living, high thinking. So this is like the other kind of conception of spiritual life. In other words, it's more introspective. It's more centered around educating yourself on the Shastras and the chanting and the reading and going, you know, keeping your life simple on the outside, going deep internally. And it almost seems like these two things are, I mean, it doesn't seem like they're contradictory, but like it's hard to reconcile what kind of spiritual life we should be trying to strive for. I mean, this is kind of a complicated question, but you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I can see what you're pointing at. And in fact, to some extent, I think it depends on the devotee, you know. There are a few people who are advanced enough that they can just do very simple things and be completely satisfied. If you're at that stage, you're way ahead in the game. But most of us wind up having to dovetail a lot of our material inclinations and ways of doing things, even knowing to some extent that they may be external or material. But we're using them in Krishna's service, and eventually we're working our way out of it. Because if we simply pretend like these things don't matter to us, and that we're at the highest stage of, you know, I mean, if it works, it works. But for most people, it's not going to work, you know. So we engage according to a service. Our service in general may or may not be a service that is kind of in line with what we're used to or what we're good at. So sometimes we are assigned a service that we're actually kind of good at. We feel comfortable in doing it, we understand it, and it sort of fits with our nature. And sometimes we get assigned a service that has nothing to do with our nature. We're terrible at it. And we're just dragging along trying to figure out how to fit ourselves into it. But in any case, over time, we try to engage the whole self in Krishna consciousness. We have usually some kind of basic service that we do. We try to do it the best we can. And we offer it to Krishna. And over time, we become more and more simple. Things become more and more simple. You can imagine how unsimple running a temple is. That's about as unsimple as things get, you know, unless you are, you know, completely a realized soul and you're doing a Zen thing where you just tell people whatever shoots out of your head at that moment, you know, which if you are on that level works, you know, but if you aren't on that level, you're going to create a lot of really weird situations, you know. So a lot of things are that way. So we use our lives, our talents, and so forth. We try to dovetail them in Krishna consciousness, and we try to help people to come forward in Krishna consciousness. And in one sense, that's a simple thing. On that level, it's simple. But as we were just hearing, that there's a lot of stuff that goes on in life. We need to know how to integrate it all, you know. How much is too much? How much is not enough, you know? And what do we need ourselves, you know? What kind of things can we just ignore? Sometimes we ignore things and they just come back to bite us later on, a few years later. We ignored them too early, or we need to utilize them in Krishna consciousness, you know. ISKCON itself, I think, has a love-hate relationship with all kinds of artists, you know, whether they're musicians or practical artwork or any kind of creative endeavor, because people who aren't creative can't feel any kind of need for doing any of these things. They just seem like it's just material, give it up, you know. Whereas if a part of your whole life was about music or art or something like that, it ain't quite the same way. And you see that gopis play music, the gopis do artwork, you know. So these things do have a place, and Prabhupada always talked about cultural conquest. So these things have a place somewhere. Granted, they can be taken to where they're a distraction, and this is what's the difficult path to walk for a person who happens to be a devotee artist or a devotee musician or a devotee whatever, you know. This is a difficult road to walk. But nonetheless, these things can be used for Krishna, and this is what makes a culture. You know, imagine a culture with no music, a culture with no drama, a culture with no art, you know. So anyway, that's an aside. Maybe that helped in what your question was, or what you were trying to verbalize. Did it help at all, or was it way off point? What's that?
That's where Varnashram comes in.
Varnashram, yeah.
Yes, so that's why we need Varnashram. So
Yeah, I
that
agree.
everybody can be engaged according to their natures and talents, and then gradually get a higher taste.
Right. So some people right to the chase, and other people need a more nuanced or more gradualized way. And at the same time, there's no reason that a person's talents and abilities need to just completely be forgotten about. Of course, Varnashram is a whole can of worms, because we have to decide what version of Varnashram we intend to institute. Are we going to institute the Varnashram system that Arjuna and Krishna saw, or will it be updated to some extent to the situation that we're actually in now? So at any rate, we're over time by about 7 minutes. So unless there's a burning question, we will wrap it up. And thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Bhāgavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.
Can I give this book to you?
Hare Krishna. Jai. It also kind of seems like ultimately spiritual practice is meant to culminate like very simple living.
Well, yes.
I mean, like that's the goal, is to become renounced to material things and become engaged in spiritual things.
Well, renunciation has to be understood properly. It doesn't mean just, you know, living naked in a cave somewhere. Yeah. It means being renounced and doing everything for Krishna. I mean, you look at Prabhupada himself, you know, how in one sense was his life simple? Well, in one sense it was, because he was just serving Krishna. But think about what he did on a daily basis, you know. He was writing books, he was managing movement, he was dealing with issues and problems in his movement. He was writing devotees answers for questions they had, and there was a lot going on. On one sense.
Protocols for his death, but he was like, Maya can't touch me. That's Prabhupada. So, but I mean, it's not like we should be imitating that, right? We're not trying to go start temples all around the world. I mean, this is I don't know if that,
Well, who knows what Krishna
Yeah.
has in store. When you're working for Krishna, you never know.
like what he'll empower to.
It's definitely